What? Okay. Good morning. So after covering Toyu and Tikkun, first Toyu and then Tikkun, and last week, especially based on the Maimer Vayas Kol of Tov Reish Ayin Dald in Ayin Beis, Hemshech Ayin Beis, we explained it pretty detailed how the Oidus of Tikkun work in context of Toyu. So I'm not going to go over that again. So I want to move now into the most powerful name for this world is Atzilus. So Tikkun is a name for the world of Atzilus, but it emphasizes the part of Tikkun, how Atzilus is a Tikkun for Toyu. But Atzilus has a lot more than just being a Tikkun for Toyu. So that's what I want to begin discussing. A third name for this world is Vrudim, in the context of the Akudim, Nukudim, Vrudim. But that too comes in that series, Akudim, Nukudim, and Vrudim, which really means the Vrudim is the Atzilus that Tikkun does not have. Tikkun is Nukudim, separate points, and Toyu rather is Nukudim, separate points, fragmented. Atzilus means basically in simple English, cooperation. Whenever you see no cooperation, it's essentially a manifestation of Toyu. When you see cooperation of different forces working together, different strengths, and people are coordinated, and there's a element of harmony, like we spoke about Tiferes, Shalom, Kosav Ashlishi, Hamachriya Beinehem. So that always indicates Atzilus. It's always essentially a taste of the world of Tikkun or Vrudim. But Atzilus is the word that we're most familiar with. So let's start with that. Now, first of all, where's the word Atzilus come from? Toyu comes from the second pasuk in Bereshis. Akudim Nukudim Vrudim is a pasuk in Vayetze. And everything, of course, is rooted in Teresh B'Ksav. Nothing is just, every piece of Kabbalah, Chassidus, is nit l'Moshe Sinai. So it's just this Pshat Remez Drusod, it's the Chelik HaSod, or the Yechida Shabbatera, that the Rebbe explains this Chassidus. So where's the word Atzilus come from? So it's a pasuk in Pasha Bal Leischa, where Moshe, the people came, the Bnei Yisrael came to Moshe complaining that they want meat, and Moshe says, Ma'ayin li basar, and then ultimately the Eibishter tells him that he's going to be Yetzal min haruach. Vayetzal, the word is Yetzal, which means literally impart, that he would take, so-called from the spirit of Moshe, who had the Ruach HaKodesh and had the Gilei HaShechina, and impart it to the Ziknei Yisrael. So Atzilus essentially really refers to the Ziknei Yisrael, that they are like Netzolim, emanations or an imparting of Moshe's Ruach, and they would serve, so to speak, like Mimutzayim, like interfaces, intermediaries, and that's how Basar is brought to the people. Now, what was Moshe's Taina? What do you mean, Ma'ayin li Basar? Because Moshe was a Ish Ruchni. He was Ish Alekim. Teira, the Eibishter chose him to be Moshe Kibul Teira Mesinai. So that was his role. Suddenly they want meat. What does he have to do with Basar? With Gashmis? There's a similar thing when the Alter Rebbe initially, when Chassidim would come to the Alter Rebbe for Barkoshes, so when they asked for Barkoshes Gashmim, the Alter Rebbe said, that's not what you come to me for. For Eitzes Ruchnim, I give you spiritual advice in Heiros and Avedis Hashem. But then there was a change of policy, so to speak, and the Alter Rebbe began to give brachas, and that's why Chassidim also go to the Rabbeim and to the Rebbe for brachas begashmis. But what was the Havamina and what's the Maskana? The Havamina is that Ruchnis is Ruchnis and Gashmis and Gashmis, just like you don't go to a Rebbe to do heart surgery, you don't go to a Rebbe for Gashmistic things. Gashmistic, you make a Keli B'derech HaTeva, you ask the Eibishter. But what's the Maskana? That all the Hamshachas, even down in Gashmis, also come from Shamayim. And the Eibishter also wants it to come through the same channels that the Ruchnistic brachas come from. So that Moshe was saying it, Api Seichel, that what does he have to do with Basar, with Gashmis? And the ultimate answer is no, it has to come from you. But then why do we need Vayetzal? So why didn't Moshe Mamshech do the Basar himself? Because the fact of the matter is that Ruchnis and Gashmis also are different. Gashmis is not Ruchnis. It's similar to the next Parshas, just to show the order in the Parshas. The next Parsha is Parsha Shlach. And then comes Parsha Kerach. So this same theme runs through all these three Parshas. What did the Meraglim Taina in Shlach? That, as Chassidus explains, the Kavanah was a very good Kavanah. That Eretz Eicheles Yishvel, physical world, Eretz Yisrael, is going to consume its inhabitants. Simply put, that when you get involved in Gashmis, in Parnasa, in the marketplace, it's going to be a stirit, Avedis Hashem. Here in the Midbar, we have everything. We're protected by the Anani HaKoved, by the clouds of glory. We have the Lechmin HaShamayim, Be'er Shel Miriam. Everything's taken care of. So we're like in a kollel. No offense. We're in a kollel, and everything is protected, and someone else takes care of us. And we can sit and learn Torah and do mitzvahs and daven, etc. So what was their big chet? The big chet, no one asked you that. The Eibusha says, I'm sending you to Eretz Yisrael. It's like someone saying, I want to stay in Gan Eden, and I want to come down Lamata Neshama Beguf. Al Korchach Atachai. You have to come down. That's the Kavanah. This world is a more difficult world. There's no Nisyanis in Gan Eden. There's no Yetzer Hara. There's no issues with health and Parnasa and other aggravation and so on. There's altogether none of that. But that's not the Kavanah. It's like a Nuach La'adam Shalei Nivra Mishan Nivra. The halach is like Shammai. That's better. It's more pleasant to not be born than to be born, because this world is kol hadracha b'cheskes sakana. It's filled with danger and it's filled with challenges. Everybody has that. But the Lamaila doesn't have any of that. But that's not. But the Alter Rebbe explains Nuach La'adam. It's more pleasant to be in the higher in the Ruchnius, but it's not more meaningful. The kavanah is to come down Lamata Tachtenim. So the Chetem Araglim was that we didn't ask you. No one asked you whether you should go into Eretz Yisrael. That was a command. We're asking how to go into Eretz Yisrael. Their mistake was they ever told us to figure out how to do it, not whether to do it. We can't ask whether to do it. That's not up to us. How to do it, absolutely. So basically they wanted to stay in Ruchnis. So it was a good kavanah. So comes Kerach, the next parsha, and the Rebbe explains this hemshech, and Kerach comes with the exact opposite time. What's his time? Oh, okay, Gashmis, fine. So Madua Tisnasa, what do we need Ruchnis Dika leaders? Everybody, Kol Eidik Deshimhem. No matter who you are, you're holy. Why do we need hierarchy and look up to Moshe Rabbeinu or Aaron or other Gdelim or other leaders? Gashmis is the Kavanah. We just heard that. The Meraglim made the mistake. So his mistake was the other way around. Gashmis needs direction from Ruchnis. You can't just dwell Gashmis, and look what happens. What was the Einish of Kerech and Adose? It says the earth opened up and swallowed them. The same words that it said by Meraglim, Eretz Eicheles Yishvel, is exactly what happened to Kerech. Well, not Kerech himself, but his cohorts. What happened? The earth can consume you. You want earth? If you don't have Ruchnis, the earth is going to consume you. You can't just go into the material world and not have a Torah and not have teachers and not have a Rebbe and not have Hadracha and so on. Because if based on Dira B'Tachtenim, why do we need a Rebbe? Because Gashmis on its own doesn't have direction. Yes, the Kavanah is the Yesh HaNivra Tachtenim, not Neilim Elyenim. But Tachtenim need Elyenim to direct them. Because if not, what do you need the whole Seder Shtalshlos? The Eibusht Yesh HaMiti Atzilus can create Yesh HaNivra. Kavanah is Dira B'Tachtenim Gendikt. What do we need all this stuff that we talked about? At Tzimtzum and Eira Ein Sof, at Tzimtzum, Kav, the Shima, Kav, Ak, Akudim, Atzilus, everything. What do you need it for? Because without that, we don't have direction. It would be like saying, tell a little child, go figure out what the Eibusht wants from you. You need chinuch. Ben Chamash L'Mikra, Ben Esel L'Mishra. Like we spoke many times, and I repeat it many times, the Eibusht made a seder. You can't just access your neshama without Aveda. And if we came into this world, even though Mashbiyan Eisei Tzadik Val Tirosha, and Mashbiyan comes also from the word Mazbiya, we get all the keches, but there's also Nefesh Abamis. And if you don't have direction, you don't have Heiros, even with Heiros, look how difficult the Mulchama is. Between the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh L'Kis, Nefesh Abamis. But imagine without direction, what will happen will be Eretz Echeles Yishva, what happened to Kerach. So we need a balance. On one hand, we need Gashmis, that's no question, and we need Tachtenim. On the other hand, the Tachtenim need to be guided by Elyenim. And that's why we have a hierarchy, and that's why there is a Torah, and that's why there are Talmidei Chachamim, and we respect them, and we have to listen to the Hiras HaTorah. You can't just do whatever you want. This was also the mistake, like Shapsi Tzvi or Jacob Frank and all they, who studied some Kabbalah and said in the Kabbalah that the deepest sparks, the Tzutzik Dusha, are in the lowest places. So let's go do Avedas. You want to have the highest sparks. It doesn't work that way. There's a say that the Torah tells you what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. You can't just say, I'm going to go into the Tachtenim Sheba Tachtenim, I'm going to be Mevar Netzutzis. What will happen is the Tachtenim will consume you, because you don't have the power, it's too strong. B'Dakus, it says in Kabbalah, Chassidus brings that Odom Arishon, one of his mistakes was, in his Kavanah, he thought he can go to Mokum HaKlippus and be Mevar it. And it doesn't work that way. You go in, Chatchila, Echte V'Asher, doesn't work. Even with a good Kavanah. So going back to the theme here, so that's why you need both things. The Hamshacha has to come from Ruchnius, from Moshe Rabbeinu. But because it has to come on the Kei Fide Makablim, that's why the Skenim are like a level of Atzilus, a shtickle like a mamutza between the Ruchnius and the Gashmis. So I'll explain in a moment what that means. Because you need both. You can't just say, you know what, the Eibishter could just be Mamshech Bosses without Moshe Rabbeinu, without the Skenim. No, it has to come from the higher elements. Everything comes to the elements Elyen. Even the Gashmis, even when we say the Yesh HaNivra is rooted in Yesh HaMiti, it's still not a jump. The Alter Rebbe says that the Eser Keiches HaNefesh are Nishtalshel Mehen from the Eser Svidus. You could say, why do we need the Svidus for? Why don't we just jump straight to Atzmus? Because even the power of Yesh goes through Eid Ein Sof, like the Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaKedesh. And I think we discussed this in the first part of this series. The Eid Ein Sof carries all the Hamshachas. Even, for example, it says that Tshuva is higher than Torah. Varayat Tshuva could be mechapen on Aveda against the Torah. And still, how do we know there's Tshuva? From Torah itself. Because even the Inyanim that are higher than Giluyim also have to come through Giluyim. Or in other Aces, even the Inyanim Gashmim have to also come through Atzilus. Obviously, Atzilus is not a Gashmi, but the Hamshachas, like everything in this world, Deimim, Tzemeya, Chaim, Medaber, the Eser Keiches HaNefesh, the Asara Maimoris, Shebehem Nivra Elam. Where are they nishtalshel from? The Eser Sfiris of Atzilus. Because you need to have that the Ruchnis guides the Gashmis, and at the same time also know there's a Havdalah between Gashmis and Ruchnis. To say that Elam Hazeh is Atzilus is incorrect. Atzilus is a holy world, totally Kedusha. Iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'garmu echad, which I'll explain as well shortly. And Elam Hazeh is a mokim of mokim klippers v'sitra achre, the shoyim gevrim bei, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, to the point that it's a cheshach chafel mechupel, to add that aniva afsi aid. So no way you can compare Elam Hazeh, Hagashmi, Achumri to Atzilus. But still there's a link, because the structure of this world evolves from the structure of Atzilus. So based on this, based on the psukim in Baal Escha, what do we take away? And how is it translated in the Chassidus? Not just Chassidus, obviously in Zohar and in Akish Arizal, is that this concept of Vayetzal, Min HaRuach, is when the Eibishter created Atzilus, that on one hand, Atzilus is not Atzmus, because Atzilus is beferish made up of a structure of Eser Sfiris, Chachma Bina Das, Chesed Gvura Teferes Netzach Heid Yesed Malchus, Moichin Midas, or if you want Chabad Chagas Nihim, and that's the structure. So you cannot say it's L'maylam Hishtalshlus, it's Hishtalshlus. On the other hand, it's Kuli Elikus. The Chachma of Atzilus is Chachmose is Baruch. The Bina is Binose is Baruch. And the Chesed is Chesed Shal Kodesh Baruch. So on one hand, it's not outside of Elikus. On the other hand, it is already a structure. It's Elikus as it manifests in structure. To put it maybe an easier way to understand it is in the Machlekes between the Rambam and the Maharal, the famous the Chilukei Machlekes. Chassidus is metavachid. Alter Rebbe and Tanya in 5 places brings the same tivuch, starting from Perek Beis in the Hagah and Tanya. And what's the thing? So the Rambam says, Hu Hamada, Hu Yidei, Hu Yidua. What does that mean? By us, Mada, Yedei, Yadua are three separate things. The Mada meaning the intelligence itself. And the Yedeya, the person who knows it, you're not one with your intelligence. Yes, once you incorporate it, it becomes a Yichud Nifla. But on your own, what you know is outside of you. You know there's a table. The table is not you. But by the Eibishter, since the Eibishter is Malei Kol Haaretz Kvedei, and he's everywhere, in Eid Milvadei, so the Rambam used the expression, Hu Amada, Hu Yedeya, Hu Yedua. So basically everything is all one. Says the Maral, what do you mean by that? We know that Les Machshava Tfisa Beklal, Chakim B'lei B'chachmi Yediyah, and so on. The Eibishter is higher than Tzir of Das. So I say Hu Amada Yediyah is like saying that the Eibishter is defined by that. So the Maral says no. The Eibishter is higher from Mada Yediyah Yedu, is higher than all these Madregas. So he disagrees with the Rambam. Chassidus comes, the Alter Rebbe says it right in the Hagah, that's not Machlekes, because it's talking about two different dargas. And Rambam is talking how it is in language of Chassidus and Atzilus. In Atzilus, Hu Hamada Hu Yedei, because the Beferish is Mada, there is Das. And the Maral is talking L'mayla Atzilus. So bottom line is that this idea is that on one hand, you have now a world which is in a way a paradox. Because on one hand, there's Beferish structure, Atzilus is made up of Spheres. And not just Spheres, but Spheres that are working together, which we talked about, and I'll elaborate more. Iskalulus, Chochmah works with Bina. It's completely involved in that way. If Atzilus became too much driven by Eir Ein Sof, like Toyu, there'd be Shviras HaKelim. Or by higher levels. Atzilus is Beferish, a full structured world. Akudim, in the moshel I gave it, like the fetus of a child of developing in pregnancy, is all Eiris, Aser Eiris B'Klei Echad. You don't have a structure there. You have one cell, you have one seed, and everything is in that seed. Then when it develops, it starts developing into details. The fetus, the child begins to develop. When the child is ready to be born, that is, in the moshel here, like Atzilus. It's a full-bodied entity. Yes, it's still a child, but everything is there. There's all the parts, all the Ramachivarim, the Shasagidim, and they also work together with each other in a healthy, viable child. That is the example of Atzilus. So it's a full structure. However, the structure is kulei teiv. There's kulei kedusha. It's completely elikus. And that's the lashon from the Kunei Zayar, from Zayar. That famous lashon, Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'garmu echad. Which means you, the Eibishter Iyu, chayui literally means the chayis, like energy, and garmui has few meanings. Garmui can mean like the skeleton. Sometimes bones are called garmuhi, or like the kalim. So the Alter Rebbe teaches chayui as eidus, and garmuhi the kalim. So the eidus of Atzilus and the kalim of Atzilus are chad. Iyu v'chayu echad, and iyu v'garmuhi echad. The Arizal teaches chayui is moichin, and garmuhi is midas. In Ayin Beis is metavich, because moichin legabe midas is like eidus legabe kalim, the fierach. But bottom line is, we're talking now the world of Atzilus. This is a description of Atzilus. Higher, you don't say that, because Chayu v'Garmu are not yet developed in a way that you could speak about it in that same way. Obviously, higher levels are also Kulei Elikus, but you can't speak about it like a full structured thing. Now, since we're already on this Zayhar, so the question is, why doesn't it just say Iyu v'Chayu v'Garmu echad? Why does it have to be said in two phrases? If it's Chad, you're saying it's one, so why is it not Iyu v'Chayu, his Eibishter, and his Eiris, and his Kalim are Chad? Why do you have to say Iyu v'Chayu echad, Iyu v'Garmu echad? So this goes into a longer discussion that in Atzilus Gufa, even though it's Kulei Elikus, nevertheless there's Eiris and Kalim. And the Chad, the Achdus of Eiris to Elikus is different than the Achdus of Kalim. Which goes back to the same idea. Remember we spoke about before, Ma'ayin li Basar. Because if you, let's say there were no Kalim in Atzilus, so you'd have Eiris, but you wouldn't have a way that would be mamshach the Eiris into a tziyud and a structure that would then be nishtalshel to Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, and all the way to this world. It's like having ideas without words. In this world, you need to have Eiris and Kalim. But so on one hand, they both are manifesting Elikus, but they do it differently. Because again, if they become one, if it was Mamish, Eir, and Keli, they are Bis'achdus. But the Keli is not Eir, and the Eir is not Keli. They work together. So the Keli, so to speak, in the Mamutza of Atzilus represents more the Atzilus as it speaks to the Makablim or the Mushpoim that will receive from Atzilus, and Eir represents more the Mashpia that is Mamshech into Atzilus. Let me explain. So if you talk about, let's say, a student and a teacher. So for a teacher to come down to the student, he has to be mitzamtzim himself. He has to somewhat diminish his brilliance, his knowledge, in order to convey it. Then he has to be malbish in Keli. He has to put it into words and mishalim and examples to explain it all. Now, if you only had the Keli, and you didn't have the Eir, obviously you wouldn't convey the idea properly. It would compromise the Eir. On the other hand, if you only had Eir and you didn't have Kelim, the student would be compromised. He wouldn't understand it well. The teacher was just being mamshech eres and no mishalim and no examples, or b'chlal, not proper communication. So any mamutza is always made up of two things. Like a translator. A translator has to know both languages. You have to know the language, let's say, the Hebrew-speaking person and the English-speaking person. And then you could serve as an interface. You know Hebrew, so you translate the Hebrew into English. Atzilus essentially is translating Elikus into the language of Elam, of Elamus. So on one hand, it has to have Eir, because it has to reflect the Eibishter's the Elikus. In other words, Chochmah of Atzilus, the Eir of Chochmah, reflects what is the focus, the emphasis in the Eir of Chochmah. That is the Eibishter's Chochmah. What your margish is the Eibishter. It's like someone learning Torah is not focusing on the intelligence of Torah, it's focusing that it's Borcha b'Torah Tchilas, the Eibishter's Torah, Neisen HaTorah. The Kelim of Atzilus is focusing on the Makabel, on the Seichel Shebazeh. So if you talk Eira Chochmah, would be more focused on the Elikus Shebachachmah, on the emes of Elikus that Chochmah is conveying, and the Keli of Chochmah would be focusing on how we understand it and we can receive that Chochmah. So that's why Atzilus serves as a perfect interface, because it has both a reflection of the Elikus Shebazeh, which in some way there's something in common of the Eris, of all of the Eris, of Chachma Bina, because it's all the Eibishter's Chachma, the Eibishter's Bina. Sekal Derech sometimes Chassidus talks about Birchas HaMitzvahs. So we say, Asher Kedushanim Mitzvahs B'Tzivanu, Baruch Atah Hashem L'keinu Melech Elam, Asher Kedushanim Mitzvahs B'Tzivanu. That equalizes all mitzvahs. And then, Aniach Tfilin, Achilas Matzah, Olesha Basukah, whatever it may be. So the first part of the bracha is like the Eir b'mamshich Ratzon Hashem. Shekedishanu b'mitzvesa b'tzivanu. There you don't have a tzir prati yet. If you take away that part, then the mitzvah can become disconnected, so to speak, Chaz v'sholom, from the Baal HaRatzon. And then comes, what's the Ratzon prati? What does the Eibishter want from us? He wants you not to put on tefillin. Now he wants you to sit in a sukkah. So that's why the second part is like the kelim of the mitzvah. So a mitzvah needs Ratzon Hashem and needs the keli. Similarly, the same idea. The Eiris represent more the Elikus Shebazeh, and the Kelim represent more the structure or the Tzir Shebazeh. And because the Eibishter wants, and the Savakash Baruch Hu did it b'taktenim, Lashon Rabim, we need a Tzir. You can't just say we're coming here and just do one mitzvah and you're Mamshech Ratzon Eliyah. That's why there's Tayag mitzvahs, and there's Lamach mitzvah seseh, Shasal leiseseh, and every mitzvah has its own rule. The mitzvahs have, which take precedent. Esig b'mitzvah, potem min mitzvah, etc., etc. Or mitzvah she'ev shalasis adei acherim. So you see the mitzvahs are distinct from one another. And yet, talking about esig mitzvah, potem min mitzvah, one of the explanations that Agat Shavar gives, and Samach Vovi explains it as well, because all the mitzvahs have each other within them. It's all part of one Ratzon Eliyah. But that Ratzon wants protem. And someone can't just say, you know what, I don't need to do pratim, I'll do one mitzvah and it has all the mitzvahs in it. No, it doesn't work that way. And every mitzvah has its name, batal yemei, batal karbonei. You can't just say, Ratzon Eliyah, I can be mamshech any time. Because the kavanah is to permeate and to transform the tziyur of Elamus, that every prat of this world, whether it's daimim, tzameya, chaim, medaba, whether it's chochma, bina, das, in the keiches hanefesh, each one in their own way should have the tailored Elikus as it fits into that particular keli. So therefore, in Atzilus, you need Eiris and Keli. The Eir again represents the Elikus Shebazeh. The Keli is also Elikus, but it's the Elikus as it's translated into the language of the structure, Keli, which is why you need a Keli. You put wine in make kiddush in a cup. The wine is like the Eir, the cup is like the Keli. And you need both if you're going to do it properly. So that's a general description of Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'garmu echad. I'm not going to go into the details. Chassidus explains what exactly is the difference in the Achdus, in the Chad of Garmui, of Ichayu, and the Chad of Garmui. But sometimes the language used is Dveikus Nikeres, Dveikus built-in Nikeres, that in the air you always feel the Alakus. In Kalim, the focus is more on the detail. So therefore, you may not feel as much the Alakus, even though it's completely Alakus. You know, similar like the difference between Moshe and Betzalel when they built in these week's Parshas, the Mishkan. So Moshe said, build the Kalim, that's the Seder in Parshat Truma, Vasisa Sa'adon, and then the Shulchan, etc. And then he came back to the Yiriyas and the Kroshim and so on. Betzalel, later in the Parshas, and Vayakel and Pekudei, and you see the order is Taket. When Betzalel builds it, he first builds the Mishkan. So the Gemara explains, why is the order different? That Moshe came and said, this order, Betzalel comes to Moshe, he was the architect. He said, that's not meaning Elam. You don't build first Kalim and then build the structure. First you build a house, and then you bring the furniture in. You don't build the furniture, where are you going to put the furniture? So, and Moshe says to Betzalel, you're right, Batzel Kael, you're correct. What was Moshe's Havamina? So there's different explanations brought on this, but the Chassidus brings also several explanations, but the simplest one, or maybe the most general one, is in Binyan Migdash and Derech Mitzvah and other places, that Moshe was the visionary. He was the Ish Elikim, and he's thinking, Seif Ma'aseh Machshav V'Tchila, what's the Matorah of the Mishkan? Matorah of the Mishkan is not the Yiriyas and the Kroshim. That's the structure, and it's needed. It's the Makifim. He's thinking, what's the Kavanah? So we know there's a difference between the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam says it's Avedas HaKavanah, so that's the Mizbeach. The Ramban says it's the Aron. That's also Kalim. So he's thinking that's the Kavanah, V'shachanti B'seicham. Where's the V'shachanti B'seicham? In the Aron. Or if it's Avedas HaKavanah is the main thing. So Moshe is thinking, Seif Ma'aseh Machshav V'Tchila. He's not the builder. He's not talking about how to build it. He's talking about what the Kavanah is. Betzalel was the practical, essentially the one that was supposed to implement it. Implementation starts first, you do in the Seder. Like we talk, what's higher, Atzilus or Asiyah? Atzilus is higher in the structure, but in Kavanah, Asiyah is the ultimate Kavanah. So going back to our discussion here, so Kalim are focused on, even though here Moshe is the focus on Kalim, but that's not really the point I want to make. Kalim, you have to focus on the details. That's what the Eibishter wants. When a person's maniach film, the kavanah at film, not sukkah. Even though they all have the Asher Kedushan v'Tzreisa v'Tzivon. And the kavanah is the kavanah elyon. It's similar to like Kabbalah Seil Malchus Shamayim and Kabbalah Seil Mitzvahs. Kabbalah Seil Malchus Shamayim is like a Kabbalah Seil Klali for all mitzvahs. Like Kabbalah Malchusay. But then there's Kabbalah Gzereisai, where you need to know exactly what this mitzvah entails, and you can't just be absent-minded and just say, I'm relying on the kavanah clause. You have to have also the kavanah process. So it's just a little like some Esis Hanigla to explain Edis and Caleb. So bottom line, Atzilus is this world of Elokus. Now, just to make it even more palatable in our lives, so who, for example, when you say a neshama of Atzilus, what does that mean exactly? You say, Oves, Hein, and Merkava. The Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov were the Merkava. What does that mean? What's unique about being a Merkava? So the simple explanation, Merkava is a chariot. So it's not the Reichev. The person that's riding on the chariot or on the wagon is not one with the wagon. So he's riding. But the Merkava has no other Ratzon and no other Kavanah except to carry the Reichev. So when you say the Oves, Hein, and Merkava, you're essentially saying, like he says in Tanya, that 24/7, Kol Yemeim, not 1 second, that they were not a Merkava Telakus. So when they ate and they drank and they slept, everything. Not just when they served up, directly doing a Tzivui Hashem. But 24/7, they were simply a chariot. Like if you looked at the Ovis, Avram Avinu was like Chesed of Atzilus on this earth. And that's not my words, that's from the Sefer HaBoyer, Chassidus brings it, that when Avram came to this world, Chesed of Atzilus said to the Eibishter, what do you need me for? You have a walking Chesed on earth, Avram Avinu. And this is a critical piece that I think is not emphasized enough. The Rebbe talks about it, but in Chassidus, you can learn it and not always realize how important this is. Every character in the Torah, whether it's Adam and Chava, or Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, everyone is a representative of a level in Atzilus, which means that even though they lived the Gashmis, there was a real Avram and a Yitzchak on this earth, but be'etzem, Torah medaberes bel yenim. What does that mean? That Avram really is the personification in this world of Chesed. You want to know what Chesed Atzilus looks like? Look at Avram's behavior. You want to know what Gvura Atzilus looks like? Pachet Yitzchak. Look at Yitzchak. You want to know what Teferes of Atzilus looks like? You look at Yaakov Avinu. So it's not just a nice remez, or that, Yaakov, it's actually Atzilus on earth. These tzaddikim, these avos, represent these spheres in this world. And that's why they're of a different caliber. Their whole life is completely dedicated to Elokus. When we say a neshama d'Atzilus, all neshamas come from Atzilus. Frankly, all neshamas come Yisrael v'Kutz B'richu Kul Echad, or whatever the Lashon exactly is. So the Chelik Elikam Mamama, she says in Tanya, everyone. And yet, he continues in Perek Beis in Tanya and says that neshamas then break down. They branch off. They're all rooted in the Chelik Elikam Mamal. But then there are neshamas of Talmidei Chacham and Tzaddikim, and they get, and from them Nimshach, to the Moyach, from the Moyach Ha'av to the Moyach HaBen, and the Moyach HaBen itself, you have the Moyach of the Ben, you have the Tzipar. So you see their levels. And it's still Chelik Elikam Mamal Mamash. How do you explain that? Because, like the human body, the head to the toe, they're all part of one body. It all comes from Moyach Ha'av. But in the structure of the body itself, that doesn't mean there isn't this chalkus. Even in Atzilus, he says in the Likutei Torah Ba'aleischa, that the Sheva Kani HaMeneda, the 7 branches of the Meneda, of the candelabra, represents 7 levels of neshamas. The neshamas that come from Chesed, and from Gvura, and from Teferes, all the way to Malchus. So for sure, as the neshamas come down from Atzilus through Biyah, so essentially what we'd say, they assume, most neshamas assume the levushim of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. That's why we don't call them neshamas of Atzilus. They rooted in Atzilus, but then they assume the levushim, and that's why we call it neshamas of Biyah. But there are neshamas that so-called bypass Biyah, like an express train, so to speak. Like we say, Moshe leip siktaima, it means that Moshe, as he was in Atzilus, the Rebbe brings this quite often, that in Likutei Torah it says that when he stood before Parei, it was Atzilus speaking to Parei. That's the Lashon in Likutei Torah. Moshe was like Atzilus speaking to Parei. It wasn't Moshe, yes, he was living in Elam Hazeh, but he did not assume the levushim of Bri Yitzir Asiyah. So if you think of it that way, then Neshama D'Atzilus essentially, when we talk, let's say, the Alter Rebbe. So it says that the Alter Rebbe was a Neshama D'Atzilus, right? And which meant that everything he did was aligned. That's why it says in Teira Shalom and other places that Friday afternoon the Alter Rebbe would fall asleep, or a nap, whatever you want to call it. Why? Because Lamaila in Atzilus is a time of Durmita Dezah, before Shabbos enters. So-called in Atzilus, there's a certain Stalkus Hachayis, like we go like a Ruchnis Dika sleep, to prepare for the new Hamshacha Chadosha that would come on Shabbos. Similar to what we say before Rosh Hashanah. Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKedesh, Simin Yudalad, that all the Eir, Reishis Hashanah and Achri Hashanah, is Reishis Chaser Aleph. There's a Stalkus of the Eir that was the previous year, to prepare through Tkiyah Shefer, through the davening of Rosh Hashanah, we're Mamshech Eir Chodesh and Mechudesh that never existed before. But in order to, it's like every morning when you wake up with fresh energy, first you have to go to sleep and so-called, it's like exhaling and inhaling. You have to first exhale the old air, oxygen, in order to bring in new oxygen. So the same thing idea here. So the Alter Rebbe would fall asleep because automatically. Rabbi Hillel Parachid says, in the same Sikha, says Rabbi Hillel would lie down and take a nap. He didn't do it automatically. He knew that was the time of Durmita Dezah, so he went and did it. And the rest of us, we know what we do. Maybe you nap, but for different reasons. So what does this mean? That the Alter Rebbe, as he was in Elam Hazeh, was a dugma for what's going on in Atzilus. It says, I think, in a Machesis, someplace it says that the Alter Rebbe, when he ate, so one of the Chassidim writes, or maybe one of the Rabbeim, I don't remember now, that it was Koyach HaGvul Sheba Ein Sof. The Alter Rebbe ate a meal, it was Koyach HaGvul Sheba Ein Sof. In other words, he was eating. Yes, in the Shom Beguf you need to eat, But what it really was an expression of Koyach HaGvul. That's the expression. I remember when I read that, I remember once by Fabring, and I noticed the Rebbe, when he would make Kiddush, at the beginning of a Shabbos Fabring, the Rebbe would make Kiddush, or he made a bracha. I'm not sure what the Rebbe said, but he drank a little of the wine, didn't drink the whole cup, so maybe he wasn't making Kiddush. No one knows exactly what the Rebbe, maybe he already made Kiddush, making another bracha, we don't know exactly. But B'kitzur, then the Rebbe would always take Mezenis and eat a little Mezenis, very little. But then, by the end of the Fabrengen, almost all Fabrengens, Shabbos, the Rebbe would then eat a whole piece of cake and eat a lot of Lefi Erech. Now, it wasn't because the Rebbe suddenly got hungry, obviously. If he was hungry, he could have eaten throughout the Fabrengen. It was because he's going to make a bracha achrein. And a bracha achrein needs a shir. That's B'pashtus why the Rebbe ate more. So I remember thinking that most of us, we make a bracha in order to be able to eat. And the Rebbe is eating in order to be able to make a bracha. It's a very different look on what a neshama. That's what a neshama Atzilus comes to this world, not because it needs to partake in Elamaz. It's coming to be mamshech elikus in this world. So the whole purpose of the eating is in order to bring elikus. We eat in order to sustain ourselves, and we make a bracha because we acknowledge that we have to do it in the way the Eibishter wants. It's a very different approach. What's the ikr? Is the ikr the elikus, or is the ikr the food? You know, tzaddik eichel l'seva nafshe is the expression, which goes also on Atzilus. All of us have a me'ein on Shabbos. But the bottom line is, basically, an neshama Atzilus means, just as Atzilus is completely aligned with what the Eibishter wants, that's how these neshamas function in this world. And it's a vital point because it gives a whole different take on understanding all the people in the Torah. You know, I've had this discussion many times with people who have not learned Chassidus. And at the end of the day, it's hard for someone to grasp. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu, or Aaron, or any of the tzaddikim in the Torah, yeah, they're greater than we are, we understand. But to put them into a completely different category, it's hard for a person to imagine. They're still basar v'dam. Or even the Tanoim and Amonoim and Shas. Are they fallible or infallible? Can they make a mistake? So if you don't know Chassidus, you say, of course, they're human beings. Fine, they're much greater than we are. We're not questioning that they are superior. Like a Rosh Yeshiva is greater than you are. But still, to say that it's only when you learn Chassidus you understand there's a world called Atzilus. And neshamas come from there. And some of these neshamas come to this world to be a dugma of what Elikus, what the Eibishter wants of us. Then you can understand that a human being is not because the humans are godly, it's because they have a power that the Eibishter gave them. Like he says in Tanya, to be a tzaddik is not something that comes through Aveda. Yes, through Aveda it could be Yarol of Ruach Memorim, the Eibishter could send a tzaddik b'pchinas ibur or whatever. But naturally, but also tzaddikim. And the rest are not tzaddikim. We're not naturally tzaddikim. We're expected to be a beinoni. That's a koyach. The person doesn't just become a tzaddik. It's true, a tzaddik needs Aveda to be megalit. But the Alter Rebbe was born on Neshama Chadash. He didn't create the Neshama Chadash. That's the Eibishter chose that. The Eibishter chose Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe didn't choose himself. He didn't campaign to be the leader. On the contrary, he actually didn't want the job. So basically, when you understand, when Chassidus, you start learning about Atzilus, then you can get a musig that there could be human beings on this earth that personify and embody what the Eibishter wants. And in that sense, they are a perfect example of Elikus. Now, there's a concept of Chet Meloshen Chesodin, we know, and Ein Tzadik Baris Shalei Yasa Tevela Yechta. That says clearly, Yechta from the word Chesodin. The Rebbe has a Sikh, Lech Lecha Chelik Hey about it. In other words, there could be a Yerida by a Tzadik. Like just like Moshe Rabbeinu reached Memtes Shari Bina, but he didn't reach Shar Hanun, which means there's a Chson. But the Chson by him is, a Chassidus brings that Chel is Gematria Memtes, 49. Because by Moshe, he was called Chelas Ava, because he was lacking the Shar Hanun. That's very different than a Chela that's lying in a hospital, God forbid, and very sick. By Moshe, even one Shar Hanun already makes him into a Chela. So you can understand that B'dakus Dedakus, there's an element of Chson. But it doesn't mean he's a Chson like Anoshim Kerkeinu. So when you understand the world of Atzilus, you learn that, then you start saying, okay, the Eibishter made such a world, and he sent neshamas to this world that radiate and shine with the air of Atzilus, and you can understand the concept of a tzaddik very differently. If you don't have that, then the most you could say about a tzaddik, he's better than I am. I do sins, he doesn't sin. But he's still a human being. Now, all these people are also human beings, but I mean to say, you could understand the idea of Shechina medaberes mitech greina. What does that mean? It could only be someone who's completely aligned to what the Eibishter wants. Moshe was Shechina medaberes mitech greina. And we say the same thing about the Rabbeim. So it's not just we're so-called, God forbid, idolizing the Rabbeim and turning them into. No, this is a concept that when you look at Kabbalah and Chassidus, you come to understand that these people, that there are individuals that do express elokus in this world. And when they speak, it's not just their speaking. It's coming from a higher place. But there's a seichel behind it when you understand like the world of Atzilus. So with that said, let me just add a few more points. I think I'll continue this next week more, because there's a lot to say about Atzilus. But the next thing I want to say is this. Now that I described it, and also want to spell out so we understand now the need. And I've been doing it each level, we have to understand why is it necessary. If Atzilus didn't exist, what would we be missing? So I think it's implicit in what I said. What we would be missing, we would not have, in our terms, something in our language with this Chochmah Bina Das, in the structure of Ishtalshus, we wouldn't have a dogma of a perfect world. Here you have a dogma of what is perfection. So even though we may never reach the level of Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov, but it still says, Mosai Yagia, Maisi De'avesai. We have to say that. Why do we have to say that? You could ask the question, no one could ever become like Avram Avinu, because there's always what you need to aspire to. You have to always know. It's like some Chassidim explain Tanya. It says, the Alter Rebbe writes in Perikid Beis, that a Beinani, he never did an Aveda. Who could say that? Who on earth never did an Aveda? So as soon as you do one Aveda, that's it. The whole Sefer Shabbenim is not chal on you. And yet in Perikid Dal, the Alter Rebbe says, Midas kol adam, v'achrei kol adam yimshech, Midas Habeinin. So what's going on here? So the different answers the Rebbe explains that when he says Le'over v'Le'yaver, it means Be'esei Shah. Now in that moment, he comes to Madreg in Echus, like someone who did Shuvah, that he's like a new person. Different explanations. But the bottom line is, one of the basic explanations is the Alter Rebbe has to set a standard. If you said, for example, since we're all flawed and we all have chesrenus, I'm not going to expect from you too much. I'll expect 10%. What you're doing is a disservice. We all have an neshama, and there's an expectation that this is the standard. It's like someone trying to teach lahavdil someone art or music. So you show them the greatest masters that did such art, that did art or played music. And the student will say, one second, I'm never going to become a Mozart. I'm not going to become an artist like a Rembrandt. Why do you need to show me these people? Just show me that I can never become like that. It's like almost depressing. No, because you need to know what the perfect circle looks like if you're going to start building circles, because you want to know what the standard is. It's like just a simple example. You go to a doctor for an x-ray of the lungs. So you'll see the doctor will put the x-ray on a screen, and near it you'll see another screen of healthy lungs, and then you can compare and say, this is what a healthy lung is supposed to look like, and this is where Chaz v'Shalom there's a problem. If you don't have a standard that's a perfect standard, we'll never know where we are. It's like the Alter Rebbe says that a mensch darf wissen, wie kleiner is und wie größer kann werden. How small you are and how great you can become. So some people know only how great they can become. They don't know how small they are. Some people know how small they are, but they don't know how great they can become. When the Rebbe expected from us and demanded everything, he was saying, you have keiches more than you think you have. To basically say, since we're simple people, no, we're not going to expect the most. That's not how it works. Any leader is going to say to you, you can achieve a lot more than you think you can. You just don't know it yet. So Atzilus, essentially, if you want to put it this way, you could say it's the perfect world aligned with Elokus. Will you and I reach that level in the fullest sense of the word? Most likely not. But that's not meant to depress us. That's meant to say, it's like that's the destination that we're achieving. We're reaching. What would the world look like if it was completely aligned with what the Eibishter wants? Which world would you point to? You can't point to Akudim because there's no real world there. It's only 10 Edis and 1 Keli. Toyu is chaos. And ultimately Shvidas HaKelim. Higher than Akudim is pure Elokus. You have no world. So the only place you can point to, Atzilus, because Bria is already, which we'll just talk about, is already beginning to become a Yesh La'atzmei, a Yesh V'nifrat. Not in the fullest sense of the word, but no longer Ir V'chayu Echad V'ir V'gamu Echad. So Atzilus would basically be, if someone were to say to you, what's the perfect standard of what a human being should be like? Atzilus. Where do you stand? Well, now I have a standard, and now I can grow toward it. I know what it means. When you understand what it means to be completely aligned to Elokus. So maybe I can't do it 24/7 like the others, but maybe you can do it for a minute. When you're davening, when you're doing a mitzvah. At that moment, you could say nothing else. All I am is a merkava to the Eibishter. That could be expected from everybody. The Rebbe once said in a Fabrengen, he said, Pischuli kechudesh shamachet, v'ani eftach lechem kepischul shalulam. So the expression in Chazal, we're still looking the exact lashon. The Rebbe writes, he never found in the Medrash exact, but Chassidus brings this lashon. It means, open for me up the eye of a needle, which is a very small little hole, and I will open for you up kepischul shalulam, which was a very wide door. So you do a little, and I will open for you the widest corridor. So the Rebbe once said in a Fabrengen, I didn't hear it, I heard it from people, it was a very powerful moment that had an effect. The Rebbe said, I'll say it in Yiddish, then I'll translate. The Rebbe said, Der Eibishter bet nicht, am soll überkennen the ganzen Leben. God doesn't tell us to change your whole life. He's saying, Pischul shalmachet, open for me up an eye of a needle. Ein rega, ein nekude, ein winkel. The Rebbe said, winkel. One little corner, one dot, 1 second. Open for me. But in that second, in jene nekude, jene winkel, so sei nur du und ich, ein Eid Mavad, just be me and you, no other agenda. No, it's an eichesdike thing. That there are moments that every person can be completely committed. We all know we have moments of Chassidus. In that moment, don't have any other agendas. Don't bring your own personal and own, just you and I. That's what the Rebbe said. Jene winkel no du und ich. So in other words, there's the concept, even though again, can you do it 24/7? You know, Rabbi Nissen Namenov would always say, when Bochum asked him, how do you overcome the sinus? So he said, you do it second by second. There's no way you can just make a decision, I'm not going to do anything. Wrong. Second by second. Right now you have a battle, push it off for a second, another second. Will it be perfect? But at least you have something you can work with. You tell somebody, tafasta merubah tafaz, you tell someone, listen, today I'm not going to do anything wrong. Most cases you're going to do something wrong and then you'll just give up. But if someone tells you, take it moment by moment, it's actually a method used by many coaches that when you want to control something, don't try to control everything. Control for one day. Don't overeat or don't do this. It all comes down to small battles. Divide and conquer. When you do that, it's much easier to gain somewhere. So that's really one of the applications of Atzilus in our life. We have now a dogma, what it means, so-called a perfect situation. Talk about the Geula. The Geula will be a perfect world, completely aligned with Elokus, which we'll talk about more. So where is it Nishtalshus? That's the world of Atzilus. Which of course means Atzilus is not somewhere in heaven. It's right here. It's the perfect model of existence before it's going to go through the Shtalshus, Abri, Etzir, Asiya, to become the world that we are, which is obviously not completely aligned exactly to Elokus. So we know what that looks like. But you have something to work toward because you know something that is perfectly aligned. And that's the world of Atzilus. So more to say, obviously. We'll talk more about it next next week. I'll stop here. And everyone have Atzilus Dika Day. The Elam Haza, of course. Good.